Hi, and welcome to the Early Retirement Roadmap Podcast, the show where I help you prepare for and thrive in early retirement. I'm Mike Upland, early retiree last year at age 55. When I retired early last year and made my retirement announcement at work and to family, there were those that were shocked and those that thought I was too young to retire, and then there were those that were surprised, but then asked the thoughtful question, how did you do it? In this episode, I'm going to talk about the 5 key things I did that enabled me to retire early at the age of 55. And if you can implement these, it's very likely you can too. And early retirement will no longer feel impossible. And if you're well on your way to early retirement, you probably will echo my 5 keys, I'm sure. And if you're younger and watching this and wondering how to do it, or if you're older and want to share this with folks on the younger side, what I'm about to share in this podcast are some really great lessons, not only for early retirement necessarily, but these principles are sound to be able to build a solid nest egg to retire comfortably in the future. The first key thing is having the right mindset and believe in time and the power of compounding. The problem is when you first start investing and saving for retirement, it feels painfully slow. And because of that, it's easy not to keep doing it and as much as you should, since you're not seeing as quick of results. And this is not helped by the fact that when you're younger, sometimes retirement can seem like it's in the distant future, so you think you'll always have time. I certainly felt this way in the beginning, but despite that, I was religious about saving and investing whenever I could, because I knew, although retirement seemed far away, time has a way of moving fast, and it seems even more so as you age. And I came to realize that when it comes to investing and saving for retirement, time is really on your side due to the power of compounding. It boils down to being disciplined and paying your future self when it comes to saving and investing for retirement. And ignore the fact that it can feel like pushing a snowball uphill, because you know what? That's just how it works. It's not failure. That feeling of pushing a snowball up the hill is just compounding still loading. And once the compounding happens, then that snowball you've been pushing crests and then starts rolling down on its own and building true wealth for retirement. Bottom line is stay in the course, don't give up, and be religious and consistent about saving and investing. Let me illustrate the power of compounding with some basic math. You may have heard of the rule of 72. What this rule says is to take 72 divided by your average annual return equals the amount of time it takes for your money to double. So just to keep the math simple on this for illustrative purposes, if you have 9% annual returns, which would be on the high end, but again, keeping the math simple for illustration, in 8 years your money would double. So a 50K retirement savings would double to 100K in 8 years. And then in 16 years, it's 200K, and in 24, it's 400K. Real simple math to show the power of compounding and how time is on your side. And you can see with this math, as time goes on, that small snowball turns into a boulder. And this is all based upon that original 50K. Of course, when you invest, you're not just putting in 50K and then you're done. Of course not. As time goes on, you're adding to that 50K, and then that money is compounding too. So your final amount is going to be much higher than 400K in 24 years. My second key to talk about, and using a sports term to do this, is you need to play both defense and offense. Simply cutting expenses like cutting lattes out of your budget at your favorite craft coffee shop or Starbucks isn't going to get you early retirement freedom by itself. It's not simply about just cutting as many expenses as you can. That's defense, certainly helpful, but not enough. You need offense too. Here's what I mean. If you earn $9,500 a month and save only $350 per month by cutting expenses and saving some income too, and you invest it for 10 years, at a typical 7 to 9% long-term return, you'd end up with somewhere around 60 to 68K. Respectable, but slow. Now compare that to someone also earning $9,500 a month who saves just 10% of that. That's $950 per month on the same timeline. At that same 7 to 9%, you're looking at roughly 164 to 184K rather than 60 to 68K. Same decade span of time, totally different engine in a much larger amount. And when you combine offense and defense, it gets wild. Push the savings rate from 10 to 30%, and now you're investing $28.50 per month. And at 7% over 10 years, you're flirting with roughly $493,000. That's the power of fueling compounding. And here's the cheat code I used, a raise capture rule. To keep the math simple again, if you get a $10K raise, keep 30% for quality of life, and then invest the rest. If we break that extra $7K you're investing down by month for illustration, that's another $583 per month. That by itself can grow to roughly $101K in 10 years at 7%. And the great thing is you don't feel the pinch because you're living the same lifestyle or a little better with that 30% you've set aside, and the math quietly compounds. And even better, if you're perfectly comfortable with your current lifestyle, then think about investing the entire raise. For illustration, that would mean going from an extra $583 per month to $833 per month. And instead of having $100K at the end of 10 years, you'd have about $145K. Bottom line is, don't feel you have to increase spending to have a higher lifestyle if you're happy where you're at. There were many times, honestly, as my career grew and I had a higher income, I could have definitely increased my lifestyle, but I didn't because I was happy where I was at. And I certainly wasn't living like a pauper or anything, which I think seems too often to be a fallacy of trying to retire early, that you have to skimp and save and live like a pauper to get there. But if you do decide to set aside some of that raise for a better lifestyle, that's fine. Just beware of lifestyle creep. You've probably heard this on the news or seen YouTube videos about it, with the person with a six-figure salary that's living paycheck to paycheck. That's lifestyle creep for you, and well, that's really scary to me. To illustrate, let's say you decided to put 35% towards lifestyle instead of 30%. That additional 5% leak is a leak of $41 additional per month. Doesn't seem like much, does it? But if you invested that $41 per month instead at 7% for 10 years, it becomes $7,096. The bottom line is pair defense with offense. Grow your income and route the new dollars to investing and let time do the heavy lifting. If you do that, you'll have 2 to 3 times more earnings in the same decade than just going defense alone. Speaking of growing your income, I want to talk about that some more, and that actually is my third key, which I call the income multiplier. So a really fast way to compress your retirement timeline is by increasing your income by raises, role upgrades, or doing consulting with those acquired skills and without letting lifestyle creep eat at those gains. Why this is important. Compounding only doubles what's there, but higher income puts more there to double and compound. 2 people can be equally disciplined, but the one who systematically grows income and captures most of it shortens the path dramatically. Let me illustrate this with an example. Meet Stacy. She earns $60K today. She's a solid performer at her job, gets modest 3% raises each year, and saves 18% of her pay. That's about $12,240 in year 1, and her contribution grows as her salary grows. If she just keeps that steady rhythm and earns roughly 7% on her investments, in 10 years she'll have around $192,000. That's good work, nothing flashy, just consistency and modest raises, and it adds up over time. Now meet Leon. He also starts at $68K, but he makes a different choice. He spends the next few years deliberately stacking higher value skills. By about year 6, his salary is at $150,000 thanks to a promotion and a role shift, and he keeps lifestyle creep on a leash. He lives as if he was still making $68K as he was comfortable with that lifestyle. As such, he's able to save more aggressively, around 30% once he's in that new role, and he still earns the same 7% market return as Stacy. Over the same 10 years, Leon ends up around $335K, $145K more than Stacy. Same calendar, same market. The difference is his additional income allows him to increase his savings rate and not spending that additional income away with lifestyle creep. So what's the takeaway? Stacy is doing a lot right, consistent saving, modest raises, and steady investing. But Leon shows you how you can compress time. You upgrade income, you pre-decide that most of each raise gets invested, and you keep fixed costs steady so your savings rate expands. And that's how people accelerate their timeline, often reaching meaningful milestones nearly twice as fast without resorting to extreme frugality or magical stock picks. And here's the part I love. This isn't Stacy's bad and Leanna's good. It's Stacy plus 1 or 2 Leon moves. If Stacy were to add extra skills, land one promotion, and invest most of the raise, her tenure number jumps dramatically too. The market's the same. The fuel you feed it is what changes the outcome. And I think this is really important because honestly, this really reflects how I was able to retire early. Here's my story. I started off my career as a corporate trainer for a medical software company. Now, I could have stayed in the same role for years and got decent raises annually as I was happy in that role, but I didn't because I knew I could make more money moving out of training, and in order to train something to others, you have to be very knowledgeable. So it was quite easy for me to move into an implementation role, and I did that in particular by becoming a consultant and help clients implement the software that I was an expert at. That move doubled my salary working for a consulting firm. Then a few years after that, my skills had increased to such a level that I decided to go independent when I had an opportunity to sign a direct contract with the hospital system, and I formed my own consulting company with myself as the sole employee. As a result, my income dramatically increased again because I was getting all the money a normal consulting firm received directly versus when I worked for a consulting firm, they were keeping at least a third or more of what the hospital system was paying them. This increase in income enabled me to buy commercial property as both an investment and to receive regular rental income. And with the extra income, I was able to invest even more, which sped up my timeline for retirement that eventually I did retire at 55 last year. And I kept lifestyle creep at bay. And by no means did I live like a pauper. I lived quite comfortably and happy, but that income multiplier and increased skills were a game changer. Some additional advice too. Sometimes the best way to increase your income is not only acquiring new skills, but if your current employer isn't compensating you for those new skills, well, don't be afraid to change things up. Find a different employer or go the consulting and self-employed route like I did. If you have a reputation and solid skills, people are willing to pay you well for. Sometimes the best way to hit that income multiplier is not to stay in one place. And bottom line, your ultimate loyalty is to yourself. All right, enough of my soapbox on that one. That leads to my fourth key. So we've talked about how you can invest more to speed up your retirement goals by increasing your income, avoiding lifestyle creep, so you have more to save and invest. So my fourth key is to know how to invest that money for retirement. To visualize this key, I want you to think of a 2-story house with a basement, or if you don't have a basement, a concrete slab. The top floor is where your growth investments are. For me, this is where you're invested in broad, low-cost index funds. Why index funds instead of individual stocks? Because they give you instant diversification, very low fees, and most importantly, they protect you from your own stock pricing impulses. Because just one bad pick or a concentrated bet can set you back years. With indexes, you own hundreds or thousands of companies. You let the winners pull the average up while the losers fade without taking your plan down with them. And the lower the fees, the more the market's return you actually keep. And when I invested in index funds based upon how far I was from retirement, I would weight the balance accordingly. Some in higher risk growth index funds that followed the NASDAQ 100 and were much more heavily weighted in tech stocks, and some in foundational index funds that follow the S&P 500 index. The first story is where we're getting in the safer territory that's holding up the second floor. Here we're talking about a percentage of your investments in value index funds. The percent, again, based upon how far you are away from retirement. And I'm not going to get sidetracked with that because there are all kinds of information on YouTube about it and across the internet. Value funds are made up of stocks that are more heavily weighted in banks, insurance companies, and consumer staples, providing steadier cash flows and high dividends too. Another investment on our first story is owning actual rental property. With this, of course, it increases in value over time, and you're receiving regular monthly income too via rent. This is something I did. I actually own a commercial property and rent it to 4 different businesses. Of course, the trade-off is dealing with repairs and just general management, but honestly, I probably spend maybe an hour or 2 in total on it per month to manage, and maybe a couple times a year on a repair. maybe 4 times per year on physical maintenance. But most of this I do myself unless it's outside of my wheelhouse. The other option you have is to invest in real estate without having to actually own and manage a property. You can invest in a real estate investment trust or REIT. A REIT is a company that owns their finances, real estate, and by law pays out its income to shareholders. Translation, you get real estate cash flow without being a landlord. Then we have the basement or the concrete slab if you don't have a basement. The basement is the foundation of your house that holds everything up. This is where your stability is. You would have your cash reserves, for example, in high yield savings accounts, CDs, bonds, etc. This is where you're going to have money for emergencies, and really important when you're retired, it's money you've parked so you can outride a down market and recovery and not have to sell funds at a loss, because then you're going to have sequence of returns risk, and this hits especially hard if it's in the early years of your retirement. If the market drops heavily right when you first start withdrawing in retirement, you're selling shares at low prices. That shrinks your portfolio faster, and even if the market recovers later, you have fewer shares left to rebound. Now, historically, a lot of bear markets last on average about a year, and many recoveries back to prior highs have taken roughly 2 to 3 years on average. Some longer, some shorter. I like a 3 to 4 year cushion of expenses so I never have to sell stocks low to fund my retirement. That's me. I tend to play more conservatively for peace of mind. But this is where the first floor of my house comes into play too, especially with the rental income. I don't need to have as much in liquid cash because my rental income is offsetting a lot of that need. And finally, don't forget about the guaranteed Social Security income you'll get in retirement. And contrary to the myth in the future it will be gone entirely, which I have to admit at one time I thought as well, that's not true. It's not going away. This is because the program is funded by ongoing payroll taxes, so as long as people are working, money will keep flowing in. What's projected is that by 2033, the trust fund reserves that fund Social Security could run out if Congress does nothing. Even then, payroll taxes alone would still cover about 80% of promised benefits. That means checks wouldn't stop. They could just be smaller unless lawmakers act. And realistically, because Social Security is so popular and politically sensitive, it's very unlikely Congress would allow a permanent 20% cut. Most likely, they'll make adjustments like raising taxes slightly, adjusting benefits for high earners, or gradually moving the retirement age to keep the system whole. That brings us to the fifth key, which is to know what your savings goal is. We've talked about how to invest, how to get there faster, but you also need to know what your goal is too. You need to know what you're working towards. For a quick target, take annual expenses times 25. That's the classic 4% rule ballpark. For early retirement, I prefer a 3 to 3.5% starting withdrawal rate to build a margin for a longer time horizon. For leaving a legacy, if that's important for you, and for one-offs, cars, roofs, weddings, bucket list trips. So if you spend $62K a year, 25 times is around $1.5 million at 4%. A 3 to 3.5% rate moves the target closer to 1.8 to 2.1 million. That's not a commandment, it's just a guardrail. Your real number will flex with cash flow if you own real estate and your risk tolerance. Also, a quick word on the famous 4% rule. You may have heard that the creator of it, Bill Bengen, has recently updated his research and says 4.7% can work for a 30-year retirement as a worst-case starting point if you use a more diversified stock mix and keep costs low. That's encouraging, but at the same time, independent research for 2025, in particular from Morningstar, still recommends a more conservative rate around 3.7% baseline for new retirees. I personally plan my own withdrawals for early retirement closer to 3 to 3.5% with guardrails. Give myself a small raise when I'm ahead, trim 5 to 8% for a year if markets are rough. That way I'm not betting my future on the rosiest assumption. All right, now I want to leave you with this too. Once you figured out your number, don't get hypnotized by that big lump sum. You will get there, and even faster with the accelerators I've already mentioned. But as you're moving towards that large goal, to track your progress more concretely and so it feels more real, track it by something I call freedom percentage. This is the share of your monthly life already funded by your money. So if your life costs $5,200 a month and your portfolio reliably covers $520 per month, you're 10% free. That's half a workday every week already bought back. Watching that percentage rise keeps you moving when the number in the account feels abstract. Well, that's all for today. I hope this podcast gave you a lot to think about and gives you a pathway to early retirement too. And also, I've got a freebie to share that I made a few weeks ago that is also a good companion for this podcast. Download my free 12 must-do steps to retire sooner and smarter. It's a checklist that offers a quick, practical guide to retiring early. I'll put a link in the description or show notes. And I've also got a free Manji Calculator Excel template I created last week for my podcast titled ACA Manji, How to Calculate and Manage It for Big Savings, which goes over not only how to calculate Manji if you're planning on going on an Affordable Care Act plan for health insurance, but even more importantly, strategies to manage it so you can pay way less for premiums and even potentially get cost-sharing reductions as well. And how managing Manji is going to be critical in 2026, so be sure to watch that one. Click the link in the description or show notes. And when you're not on the go, Early Retirement Roadmap is available on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and until next time, this is Mike Upland, early retiree last year at the age of 55. Take care and make the most of today.